All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for inviting me here. I'm sure I know many of you in the room, even though I can't see you. But had been to several South Jeffco Tea Party and of course North Jeffco Tea Party meetings over the years, back over the last 10 years, really, when I kind of started getting involved in politics. Just a little bit about me here. Born and raised in Jefferson County. I was a legislative aide back in 2017 down at the state capitol for Representative Tim Leonard, one of our Liberty leaders at the time. Did some campaign consulting, worked with some friends down there, of course, some good pro liberty uh, people running for office, whether they're county commissioners like Tina Francone or state representatives. And of course, even worked briefly on Tom Tancredo's governor campaign back in 2018. A short-lived campaign it was. But nonetheless, for the last 4 years, I've been running freestatecolorado.com. Wanted to get my voice out there really during the COVID years when there was so much bad things happening, so much abuse of authority by the governor and the public health departments. Wanted to speak out and try and do something about it. So created freestatecolorado.com. Have gained quite the following on Twitter, Facebook, Telegram, YouTube. So definitely find me on Twitter, Telegram, YouTube, primarily Facebook as well. And then I started Northern Colorado Liberty on the Rocks, our Liberty on the Rocks NoCo chapter last year. And we've been having twice monthly meetings in Fort Collins and Greeley. So if you know anybody up here, I'd be happy to plug them in and get them involved in our Liberty community that is only growing up here. We're trying to I just moved to Greeley. Like I said, born and raised in Jefferson County in Arvada. But, after COVID, I really wanted to get up to Weld County and I'm never leaving Colorado. It's my home. I'm going to fight for liberty and freedom here. But I wanted to be a little bit more free. So moved up here to Weld County and definitely put my roots down here to fight for liberty and trying to create a little bastion of freedom up here to help push back against the growing authoritarianism of the state. So check out freestatecolorado.com. I have a lot of articles and interviews. I'm sure you're a good friend. Everybody knows Natalie Menton, one of our great Liberty leaders from Lakewood, from Jefferson County down there, a good friend of mine. We do a lot of videos together talking. We did two recently talking about some of the information I'm going to talk about tonight, but the passenger rail that they're trying to push through, as well as trying to take away our Tabor refund money for the majority of Coloradans to give it to a certain class of people. But I got another interview coming up. I'm going to record this week with Ian Escalante of Rocky Mount Gun Owners, going a little bit more in depth on all the gun bills, what passed, what didn't, kind of what lawsuits RMGO is going to be involved in, kind of give us an update on all of that. So stay tuned to Free State Colorado for all of that. But really this year, I focused a lot on the legislative session. I did 18 2-hour live streams going over since January. Just finished up this last week of the legislative session. Myself and Michael Vance, who's the legislative director of the Libertarian Party of Colorado, did videos going over all the important legislation of the week. You can watch those on Free State Colorado if you really want to deep dive into some of the bad bills, some of the good bills, kind of all the shenanigans that happened down there at the legislature. Actually, tomorrow night, I'm speaking at Liberty on the Rocks down at the Independence Institute, where I'm going to give a pretty in-depth presentation on what happened, recapping the legislative session. So I hope you can join me down there at Independence Institute, 7 p.m., Liberty on the Rocks. But check that out. We had a really successful live stream that we did every week this year. I had Mayor of Keensburg, Mayor of Monument, some of our Liberty leaders out there, people fighting back against the legislation, people going down there to speak at the state capitol. So some really good interaction. We definitely generated a lot of interest and got people to show up, to speak out, to really have a voice down there at the legislature. It's so important to show up at committee hearings and look these legislators in the eyes. You're 10 feet away from them, tell them how wrong they are, tell them how right they are in some cases, and it's really empowering. And these legislators don't get it enough from the public in terms of how bad their policies really are. So we'll talk about a little bit of that tonight. So some of the big takeaways from the session, as Mike talked about the gun bills, I won't spend too much time on these since you've already talked about it. But of course, the big victory was that assault weapons ban dying in the state Senate. It did pass the state House, which was really scary. So last year in 2023, it didn't make it out of committee. It got introduced in committee and was killed in committee. Committee hearing lasted till 1:30 in the morning with over 500 people signed up. So that was a good sign. Unfortunately, this year it made it further than last year. It passed out of committee and actually passed the entire House as a whole. So just to reiterate what Mike said about, the Republicans having a super minority down there really made it a challenge to fight back. And it was really, really shocking to see the assault weapons ban actually pass through the entire state house. Thankfully, the state Senate killed it. I heard a few different things from some insiders there. I heard from about Governor Jared Polis years ago was quoted as saying he doesn't support a gun ban. He doesn't think it's successful. So that could have had something to do with it. Big surprise, actually, Tom Sullivan, state senator from the Centennial area, Democrat who's rabidly anti-gun, but supposedly does not like the gun ban idea overall. I had a legislative aide actually reach out to me on Twitter and tell me that he had heard that Sullivan didn't like it, and that's part of the reason that the bill died. Also, James Coleman, who was the committee chair, apparently didn't like it either. He had some friends, some other African Americans who owned gun shops who were really pushing him hard on that, and he had backdoor behind the scenes supposedly told them, hey, don't worry about it, this bill's not going anywhere. So there's a lot of different insider information, but it's interesting to see how the Senate's a little bit more moderate, a little bit more tempered than the radical House. Of course, as you know, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of these House members are Democratic Socialists of America. It's the largest card-carrying socialist organization since the Communist Party was disbanded. I really suggest people check out on freestatecolorado.com. I did a write-up of the DSA last year and really went into what they believe, and it is absolutely shocking. I mean, they're a total communist organization. It is absolutely terrible. And really, people always ask, they say, well, hey, they want to abolish the police. They want to end mass incarceration. They really want to go after the police. But why would they want to give the police power to take our guns away? Well, it's because, in my mind at least, they want to take guns away from law abiding people. Let the criminal element, their fellow revolutionaries, of course, are not giving up their guns. And then there's no police force out there to really do anything against them. At least that's what I think. I don't want to sound too conspiratorial, but it seems to be in line with a lot of other things that they're saying. They know who's going to follow a gun ban. It's the law abiding people like us. And those are the people they want to disarm, so we can't stop them from their further plans, unfortunately. As Mike mentioned, the gun owner insurance bill 1270 also died. Really happy to see that. That would have been extremely devastating. And there was a little bit of talk earlier about Senate Bill 131 expanding the gun-free zones. Originally, that bill would have banned it at churches, event centers, theaters. I mean, really everywhere. Any place there's a large public gathering. That bill was heavily amended to only include schools with certain exceptions. So if you have your concealed carry permit or you're a law enforcement or you're a security personnel, you could still have your firearm at schools, but they really watered it down. And it did pass, unfortunately, made its way to Polis's desk. 1174, really bad, requiring concealed carry permits, making it a lot more difficult, including live fire training, including a whole host of other testing. You have to be subjected to this anti-gun propaganda and answer questions about all the gun laws that they're pushing in our faces. So really, really bad bill that way. Senate Bill 66, yeah, Jared Polis actually signed that one into law. A lot of these haven't been signed yet. Now, they will become law automatically without his signature, but he can still veto them. So we're really hoping he does a couple of these at least. But gun purchase tracking, where there's a credit card code. So use cash, just a really big warning. Use cash if you go buy a firearm, if you go buy a ammo, really try and limit your exposure that way because they're going to profile people and they're going to go after people who are completely law abiding but may seem suspicious. That bill was very similar to Senate Bill 003 in terms of weaponizing the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, giving them $1.7 million to go after gun shops, to go implement this gun purchase tracking and these other policies that they're pushing through. So a very bad bill there. Unfortunately, that also passed. The state permitting for gun shops, House Bill 1353 passed as well, and House Bill 1349, the gun and ammo tax. So that will actually, if Polis doesn't, unless Polis vetoes it, that'll be on our ballot in November, asking the voters of Colorado to approve an excise tax on guns and ammo. I think it'd be unconstitutional, like most of these probably are. But of course, it takes a lot of money to challenge them in court and get them ruled unconstitutional. And of course, you mentioned 1348, the vehicle storage requirement also passed. So very bad news for gun owners in Colorado this year. Another reason for people to get a little bit more motivated, get involved, and show up and speak out and do everything you can. Well, let's talk about some of the other bills that went through the legislative session. One of the most controversial bills, a bill that actually got some people kicked out of the committee hearings, some people going down to testify against the bill, was 1039. This bill really exploits students across Colorado. So I'll just read from the bill summary here from the legislative website. It says, quote, the bill requires each school board of education in pilot schools to adopt written policies prohibiting discrimination on the basis of gender expression, which includes the use of a student's chosen name. The written policy must specify that it is discriminatory to knowingly or intentionally use a name other than a student's chosen name. The bill specifies that for purposes of anti-discrimination laws, discrimination based on gender expression includes the use of an individual's chosen name. So, of course, the concern here is you got little Timmy going to school, and maybe he's got a counselor or a teacher or somebody like that who maybe says, "Hey, maybe you're really a girl. Maybe you should really be called Tammy." And if the little kid goes along with it and says, "Yeah, call me Tammy," now all of a sudden, legally, the staff, teachers, everybody at the school is required to call him Tammy, and it doesn't matter what the parents say. It really wouldn't matter what the parents say. Of course, we've seen this going on for years where they're really trying to attack parental rights, really get in between the parent-child relationship and put the state in its place. Really bad legislation down there that did pass, and Jared Polis did sign that into law, House Bill 1039. So yet another reason to get your kids out of public schools for sure. Another gender bill, controversial one this year is quote unquote Tiara's law, which allows felons to change their name based on their gender identity. So you have a criminal like the person the bill was named after who could go commit some sort of crime. They get out of jail, or maybe they're still in jail, decide they're a different gender, decide they should have a different name. And then the bill states that good cause includes changing the petitioner's name to conform with their gender identity. So now you have a violent felon potentially who's now out of jail, changes their name, a lot easier to hide their identity. So as you can imagine, that's why there was a lot of concerns over this bill. But of course, as expected, this bill did pass the state legislature this year. So another really bad bill, House Bill 1071. Some other takeaways from the session, a really good organization is the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition. If you don't follow them, definitely check out their website, Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition. But they really sounded the alarm on two bad bills. Senate Bill 157 was actually passed and signed into law back in March. So while the legislative session was in full swing, the state legislature leadership, Steve Fenberg, Julie McCluskey, and of course, Jared Polis signed this bill as soon as it got to his desk. Uh, really, quote unquote, clarifying the open meetings laws, which means that these legislators are somewhat exempt from Colorado sunshine laws, kind of defining when and where they have to announce these meetings, what's considered an open meeting, and how nice it is for these politicians to be able to make their own changes to the law that directly affects them. Absolutely bad news. So the Colorado Freedom of quote, this is from an article from Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition. They said the exemptions will encourage legislators to formulate and debate public business in an unlimited way via email, text messages, and ephemeral messaging apps such as Signal without the public's knowledge or scrutiny. So before a year ago, you may remember the state legislative leadership was sued actually by Bob Marshall and Elizabeth Epps, surprisingly, sued them for their anti-transparency policies, where they were having secret closed-door meetings. They were trying to avoid Colorado's open records laws, open meetings laws. And so, of course, the legislator got busy this year early in the session changing those open meetings laws so they would be much more exempt. So really unfortunate, really bad news, but that bill did pass and Polis signed that into law. There's actually a ballot initiative to combat this, which I'll talk about here shortly. Thankfully, House Bill 1296, the modifications to Colorado Opens Record Act, otherwise known as CORA, was killed. It did make it through the House, but was killed in the Senate. This is that bill you may have heard of that had the vexatious requester clause, which means if somebody was requesting too much information through Cora requests, was being vexatious in terms of filing these Cora requests, they could be ignored. They could be categorized as somebody who is quote unquote abusing the system and be ignored and not able to use the Cora request to find out what was going on with the public. Unfortunately, Republican Matt Soper was on this bill, Western Slope Republican, but the excuse he gave was that this helps city clerks, county clerks, it helps local government officials to not be have all their time taken up by these transparency requests, these Cora requests. I think that was a lame excuse. I think that obviously the government works for the people, and if the people want the information, that should be the first rule of the government is to make sure the public's well informed of what the government is doing. But thankfully, that bill was killed. But it was really shocking to see uh, this attack on our ability to find out what our government is doing. It also would have increased costs by combining core request into a single request, which, if you've ever done a core request, you get the first hour for free. So they can't charge you if it's going to take an hour or less. But and then you wait a week or two, you could submit another one, an hour or less. This bill would have said, well, hey, if you file all of these within a certain amount of time period, they're going to be counted as one request. So you lose that first hour on subsequent requests, unfortunately. So it's something to keep an eye on. I think the transparency issue is a good bipartisan issue that candidates and activists should be focusing on. And unfortunate to see that some of these Democratic leaders, unfortunately, were against transparency. And I think, I know you mentioned a lot of candidates' names earlier. If you have any records of their opponents running, voting for these bills, I think that's something the voters should be well informed of. So, one of the big reasons, of course, to pay attention to the legislature is because these votes can be used come election time to challenge and hold these politicians accountable, of course. Moving on, another big issue, of course, over that we've seen over the last couple of years is housing and transit. Obviously, Colorado's housing prices, rent has increased substantially. Our roads are totally clogged. As somebody who's born and raised here, and I'm sure a lot of you in the room have seen the changes in Colorado just with so many people moving here. It's kind of hard to blame them. It's a great place to live, but nonetheless, the government policies pushing these uh, high density bills is only going to exacerbate the problem. If you ask me, I don't think people move to Colorado to live in crowded apartment buildings and not be able to have a car. They move here to enjoy our wonderful scenery, our open spaces, our beautiful mountains, right? So unfortunately, these bills kind of slap in the face to those of us who love our open roads and our open skylines. One of the signature bills that passed this year was House Bill 1313, housing and transit oriented communities. This is a big one Polis was pushing. So this bill is basically top down governance where the state is requiring small local communities, so suburban communities and rural communities, to develop high density housing around transit corridors if they want this tax money. So a lot of tax money ends up in the state, whether it's the highway funds from the federal government or gas taxes. The state can kind of decide who's going to get that money. So it's kind of that carrot and the stick where the state government can say, hey, if you want this tax money, even though this tax money may have come from your local community, if you want it back, you got to develop high density housing around this mass transit. So this is that front range rail they're really trying to push, which is just a total pipe dream, if you ask me. And of course, trying to force people into RTD and give up their cars. So, in a similar vein, House Bill 1007 did pass as well, prohibiting occupancy limits. So right now, before this bill passed, local communities across Colorado could say, like Boulder actually does this quite a bit. They say, in Fort Collins or these college towns, they say, hey, only so many unrelated people can live in one house at a time. And this bill says that, no, we're going to say these houses can have as many people as they want, as long as it doesn't interfere with health and safety. It's pretty ephemeral type of language there, but nonetheless, the local government would have to prove that too many people in the house compromises the health and safety of the community or the individuals in the house. But otherwise, as many people as possible could cram into some of these houses. So a real high density push with that bill. Another bill, House Bill 1152, one of the accessory dwelling unit bills this year. So these ADUs, these granny flats or mother-in-law cottages, whatever you want to call them, basically forcing small governments or local governments across the state to allow these ADUs on properties, limiting how the local government can prevent them or stop them from being created or built. So again, this is a state overreach, if you ask me, of the state government going into these local communities and say, no, you have to accept high occupancy households. You have to accept these extra houses built on the same property. And of course, they're trying to really push this idea, and it's quote unquote their solution for the massive housing costs and the homelessness, everything else. But I don't think it's necessarily going to work out that way. Moving on to keeping with the housing and transit issue, Senate Bill 184. This was Senator Fenberg, the Senate president, one of his signature bills. Uh, Again, they want to build this front range passenger rail, basically from Pueblo all the way up to Fort Collins, really all the way to Cheyenne eventually. It's going to cost billions of dollars, of course. They have to use the federal government and their Amtrak contracts to make it happen. We've seen promises of fast tracks of RTD light rail all the way up to Longmont for the last 20 years, which has never materialized. But now they think they can do it if they just get enough money. So they're going to create a new fee. And anytime you see fee or enterprise in any of these bills, it really should ring your alarm bells because that means they're trying to circumvent the taxpayers' Bill of Rights. They're trying to circumvent Tabor by calling something a fee instead of a tax. So, of course, as you know, if it's a tax, the voters have to approve it. If it's a fee, they don't have to approve it. It's a very thin line between what's a tax and a fee, of course. So this new rental car fee is $3 to $4 per day. Of course, it's less if you have an electric vehicle, but for a gas-powered vehicle, you're paying $3 or $4 a day more now. Once this bill goes into effect, and then a lot of that money is going to go to this mass transit projects, including this front range passenger rail. So really unfortunate. Of course, they were trying to sell the idea that it was tourists who were going to pay this. But if you ever been in a car accident or you ever needed to have a rental car, it's a lot of people here who are not tourists who are going to be paying this fee, this tax, just to get a rental car in Colorado. Unfortunately, another one is House Bill 1304. No parking requirements also passed. So prohibiting local governments from requiring parking requirements for multifamily housing. So, you might see down in Littleton a big apartment building go up or a, multifamily property like a duplex or quadplex, I guess. And, normally they'd say, well, hey, you have to provide a certain amount of parking spaces for the people living there. Well, this bill says, no, you don't. Yeah, if you have a big apartment building, it doesn't have to have any parking at all. So, of course, some of the developers love this because they can cram more housing units onto this property. And the idea is, hey, well, hopefully it's going to be on a near mass transit because the local government's going to get that money for doing that, that tax money, those grants. So that you can see kind of the whole picture here of what they're trying to create is no cars and this high density housing with no parking. I mean, it's really just going to clog up the streets. You can imagine how bad it could be. Imagine a huge apartment building goes up in Lakewood in an already crowded neighborhood and now there's no parking spaces. I mean, people are going to be parking for blocks away. It's not people aren't going to magically give up their cars because of this. So absolutely ridiculous. Uh, Preventing local governments from designing their communities how the local people want. That's what it really comes down to. Another bill, House Bill 1175, the right of first refusal did pass. They tried to do this last year. Thankfully, it was killed. This is a much more watered down version, a bill that was much more acceptable to local governments, to people across the state. But unfortunately, this bill allows local governments to be the first to buy publicly financed affordable housing. So if there's already affordable housing units that are privately owned, as soon as they go up for sale, these property owners are required to notify local governments. Local governments have the option to buy it at the fair market rate before it goes to the private market. So definitely an attack on our property rights. If somebody owns this property and they want to sell it to whoever they want, they should be able to, of course. And it's just leading more and more towards government control of affordable housing or multifamily housing, which is going to be a disaster, as we've seen time and time again. So that's the housing and transit bills. There's even more than that, but those are some of the big ones. Some of the other ones we've seen, of course, this anti-oil and gas and anti-vehicle legislation. No surprise, we see this kind of thing every year. Thankfully, Senate Bill 159 died. This was quote unquote a symbolic bill. That's what Kevin Priola, former Republican, but really a Democrat, and now out in the open Democrat, had called it. But this bill by 2032 would have basically phased out the entire oil and gas industry in Colorado by slowly limiting the amount of permits that can be issued and then saying you can't renew your permit. No permits would be renewed after that time period. It would have cost of the state, of course, billions of dollars in tax revenue, billions of dollars in just economic activity, thousands of jobs. Would have been a really bad bill. It actually made it a lot further than I expected. It made it out of committee, but it did end up dying. So thankfully, it did die. I believe in its second committee, if I'm not mistaken, or the Senate floor. But really bad bill. Really scary to see anything like that even entertained. Senate Bill 36, thankfully, also died. This was the bill that was going to be a quote unquote fee, really a tax on vehicles. So if you had a bigger truck, you're paying more. The fee's a little bit bigger, of course. It depends on your vehicle. So most vehicles in Colorado would have been affected by this. This is through, of course, your registration, your plates that you get every year. You'd have a new fee as if you don't pay enough, but it would have raised that price of those plates every year, that registration charge, and really tried to force people into giving up their larger vehicles. And it was an enterprise. So that was a way to get around Tabor, of course, which is why we see the fee there. But it was an enterprise to protect vulnerable road users, they called it. So the vulnerable road users, people riding bikes and scooters, I guess, walking around, this money would have been taken from people owning cars, people just trying to feed their families, get a car to go to work and use it to build more bike lanes and things like that. So absolutely ridiculous bill. Thankfully, that died. Unfortunately, one of the bills that made it through was Senate Bill 230. This was probably the biggest oil and gas bill we saw this year. It was a compromise, is what they're calling it, between the governor's office. He had been working for weeks on this, apparently, or if not months, with the industry, with the radical environmental activists out there. There was going to be some really bad ballot initiatives, basically to get rid of oil and gas industry in Colorado. They're pulling those with this compromise, supposedly. But new fees on oil and gas over the next 2 years, it's going to be about $250 million in fees, which is really taxes, of course. And of course, that's going to transit. So your trains, your light rail, the dangerous RTD that nobody likes to ride. Uh, so that bill did pass, another signature bill from the governor, one of his top bills, his top priorities this year. But really bad news. Of course, they're just chipping away, keep going after oil and gas as much as they can. I'm sure you probably saw if you watched TV this year, basically from January through April, there was ads every once in a while promoting the oil and gas industry, and they were really spending a lot of money trying to market the positives of oil and gas to try and combat this bad legislation. So that's why you saw those ads on TV from oil and gas companies. Moving on, moving on. Some other bills of interest, some very interesting bills. Senate Bill 43. Colorado is actually one of the worst states in the country for raw milk. Raw milk is basically outlawed. It's very hard to get raw milk. There was a bill that would have legalized it, but it would have also created this massive new regulatory scheme where the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment would be able to go and inspect these raw milk facilities and create this whole new database of who's producing the raw milk. I thought it was a bad bill because of the regulation. So I was kind of happy to see it die. I think we're going to see more type of food freedom bills like this raw milk bill, hopefully a cleaner bill next year, something that's going to move Colorado forward on raw milk. It's an issue Polis actually supports. And of course, rural legislators should support as well. So hopefully we'll see some decriminalization of raw milk in the near future. Another bill that died, House Bill 1065, to reduce the state income tax. I'm really unfortunate to see that die early in the session. It would have been a good one. Uh, Surprisingly to some, but this bill keeps coming up over and over. House Bill 1028, the safe injection sites or the quote unquote overdose prevention centers. That bill died in the House as well, or in the Senate, excuse me. Actually made it through the House. I was surprised to see that it made it all the way through the House, but did end up dying in the Senate. Again, we're seeing that Senate as that little bit more moderate uh, place where some of these really extreme bills go to die, thankfully. So, like Mike was saying early, if the couple Senate seats are flipped, 2 to 3 Senate seats, and a significant of seats in the House, it could really slow down some of this really bad legislation. But again, interesting to see the safe injection sites bill die this year. I guess, and part of this is it can give you hope too, or gives me some hope. As radical as some of these politicians are, it's not entirely a lost cause, right? I mean, they stopped some of these bad bills, like the pet registration scheme. I mean, this was the most ridiculous, most laughable bill there was. Representative Regina English was the sole sponsor. Nobody else signed on to it. They killed it in the first committee on a vote of 12-0. She completely agreed because they told her how ridiculous it was. House Bill 1163 would have forced everybody in Colorado who wanted to legally own a pet to register your pet with the government and also list a caretaker if something happened to you who would be taking care of your pet. I mean, you're talking about goldfish here, you're talking about gerbils, hamsters, dogs, whatever. It was an extremely ridiculous bill that everybody basically, even the most extreme people on in the legislature were like, what are you doing with this? So good to see that one go. Another bill, third year in a row that the flavored tobacco ban bill has died, Senate Bill 22. It would have allowed counties across Colorado to basically ban tobacco outright. But of course, really going after that flavored tobacco, of course, to save the kids who are, the excuse for a lot of these bad bills. But I was happy to see that Senate Bill 22 died, banning flavored tobacco. So let's hope that doesn't go forward in the future, but I assume they're going to introduce it again. The anti-tobacco lobby is pretty strong still. Another bill that died was Senate Bill 33, the Airbnb tax. It would have basically quadrupled taxes on people's vacation properties. So as you can imagine, you had all the people from Vail and Aspen and a lot of these wealthy people up in the mountains totally screaming to stop this bill, and it didn't make it far at all. It died in its first committee hearing. It caused so much controversy. It was really interesting to see which bills make it, which ones don't, based on the interest behind it. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. The people who own these vacation properties don't want to pay more property taxes. It's probably not feasible for them to continue to have them as Airbnbs at that point, just because the taxes would be so high. So it was very interesting to see the pull they had, the ability they had to stop this bill from going forward. So Senate Bill 33 also died. All the bills on this one died on this slide here. So some really interesting legislation. Of course, there were over 700 bills introduced. And, it's crazy to see, to even try and track how much is down there and how much is going on and how these legislators can even keep track of it is crazy. A couple more, another slide here on some of the bills. I'm sure this will ruffle people's feathers. Senate Bill 182, the illegal immigrant driver's licenses bill. So Colorado had a requirement previously that it takes 2 years. You have to show 2 years of history of living here before you could get a Colorado driver's license if you're an illegal immigrant. This bill will basically say, hey, if you have an Ecuadorian ID, a Venezuelan driver's license, doesn't matter. You have a passport from Colombia, hey, we'll give you a driver's license here in Colorado now. So as you can imagine, this bill incentivizes, just like 1280 incentivizes illegal immigration, making it a lot easier for people to come here and get a driver's license, and of course, then make it easier for them to get whatever social welfare that is offered to them. So House Bill 1280 creates this immigrant welcome program. Uh, I don't remember the exact dollar amount, but this big chunk of money, taxpayer money, to go towards welcoming all these immigrants that have come into Colorado. And of course, incentives drive behavior, like I just said. So basically, kind of opening the doors to Colorado's immigration crisis, making it even worse. So, two really bad bills that were introduced kind of late in the session. But nonetheless, I think the voters of some of these swing districts really need to be made aware of who voted for these bills for sure. Mike alluded to this one earlier, House Bill 1311. This is a video I actually did with Natalie Metton. You can check it out on freestatecolorado.com talking about this bill. Basically creating a tax credit for low-income parents up to $3,200 per child. So really bad in terms of taking away of course, where are they getting that money? They're getting that money out of our taxpayers' Bill of Rights surplus fund. So all that money that would come back to us, everybody across the state, everybody got their $800 check this last year or this year when you filed your taxes. There should be more coming back, but of course they want to give that money to just the people that the legislators decide, not to necessarily the people who paid the tax money into it. So creating this, and of course, as you know, a tax credit means people get the money back even if they owe no taxes at all. So you can imagine somebody who's, maybe doesn't pay taxes very much just because of their income status and the other tax burdens they have, has maybe 5 kids, they're going to get $3,200 back potentially. And I mean, that's a lot of money. So, I mean, what kind of society are we creating where that kind of behavior is incentivized? And those are the people who are going to get the lion's share of our hard-earned tax money. Absolutely ridiculous. So really bad bill taking away our taxpayers' bill of right refunds. A really interesting bill as well, Senate Bill 171. We've seen what a disaster the reintroduction of wolves has been in Colorado. This is the reintroduction of wolverines. So, maybe less of a threat than wolves to livestock, but nonetheless, this whole idea that the legislators can kind of manage and engineer our state towards deciding what animals to be here and what not. And so now wolverines is the latest one they want to introduce. And that bill did pass, unfortunately. And so did House Bill 1311. It also passed. I didn't put the notes on there. Two bills that I followed pretty closely this year, House Bill 1129 and Senate Bill 75. going after these transportation network companies or rideshare companies. So that's your Uber, your Lyft, Uber Eats, DoorDash, all of that. So supposedly these bills are going to help drivers by increasing their transparency in wages, giving them more tip money, and really giving them more tools. It's just a micromanaging. It's these legislators micromanaging these companies, thinking that these companies aren't giving the workers a fair shake. And so they want to come in and basically say, here's how you should run your business. So these legislators trying to force these companies to run their business a certain way is going to increase costs, make it more difficult, interfering in the market. We've actually seen Seattle, uh, a lot of these companies leave Seattle because of all the minimum wage requirements out there that these companies say we just can't afford to operate. We're going to go ahead and pull out of your state because we're going to lose too much business. It doesn't make sense for us. So, unfortunately, we could be seeing something similar here in Colorado. So that's what I got on some of the legislation, some of the interesting bills. Just wanted to touch briefly on Jefferson County schools. I'm a product of Jefferson County schools. Thankfully, it was back in the 90s when there wasn't as much of this craziness going on. But I just thought it'd be interesting, talking about these test scores. Looking at Colorado is at 50% proficiency, meeting or exceeding expectations on English language arts, and only 38.8% in meeting or exceeding expectations in mathematics. So when you really think about all the agendas at public schools, these government run schools, everything they're pushing, and only 38% or 39% of the students are proficient in mathematics. I mean, where's this money going to? What a waste, Another reason to get your kids out of public school, they're just failing. That means 60% of the children in these schools are not meeting the standards in mathematics. Now it looks bad, but when you look at the state, it's actually Jefferson County is a little bit better than the state. So all the schools across Colorado, all the grades in 2023 for English language arts, only 43% were meeting or exceeding expectations. And for mathematics, 32.9%. So as abysmal as all of Colorado schools are, Jeffco's at least slightly better. So, I guess that's a slight positive, but nonetheless, just a total failure when half the kids aren't meeting or exceeding expectations in English language arts. What else are these schools there for, right? Apparently only to push an agenda. So of course, we've seen some really bad articles about Jefferson County schools. It seems it's unbelievable. In Colorado, almost every week there's another story coming out about kids being abused or other issues. So just wanted to at least bring this up. Article here from last year in September on the bottom. Controversy erupts in Jefferson County after the teachers union tells educators to destroy evidence of student surveys regarding gender identity. So just how dangerous are these schools, where unfortunately these teachers can prey, or not even teachers, but staff members prey upon these kids, and then they want to keep everything from the parents. So another one up there from December of last year, parents allege Jeffco Public Schools transgender policy violated constitutional rights. That's the one where they had the boy who identified as the girls sleeping in the same bunk bed as the girls for this retreat or this school trip. And then this year, just April of this year, former Jefferson County high school paraprofessional charged with child sex assault. That was down in Lakewood. In February of this year, Jeffco student assaults bus driver. Wanted to include that as well, just because it's a sign of the times. It's an example of how dangerous these schools are, where even students are assaulting the bus drivers. So, bad news in Jefferson County Public Schools. Wanted to bring up some of the stuff going on there. One other thing, a really interesting article, you could check it out. It is from last year, but nonetheless, if you go to denvergazette.com, it's from Jimmy Singenberger, but talking about Jeffco School spurns parents and accountability. So the reason I really wanted to bring this up is because, as you guys mentioned, Jefferson County Schools is going to ask for another mill levy override. They're going to ask for more bond money from voters this year. But if you look at how bad they've spent this money in the past, I mean, the kids are failing school, kids are failing to meet their standards, but of course they want more. So in 2018, Jefferson County voters approved $563 million. That's $500 million, $500 million, absolutely crazy, and they still went over budget by $200 million. So absolutely crazy. They don't know what to do with the money. They're not running it efficiently. It's really bad news down there. So, really come out against any extra mill levy overrides or money for these public schools, unfortunately. So that's what I got in Jefferson County schools. Mike alluded to this earlier. I know it's been a big issue. Definitely check out a video with Natalie Menton. We did a whole video going through her interview with Sean Boyd and kind of deep diving. I deep dive into the Ian Silveri, Brittany Pedersen, and the connections. So I put this little chart together here. So Brittany Pedersen, your congressperson from Congressional District 7 down there in Jeffco, is married to Ian Silveri, who ran Progress Now, who's totally a partisan hack, who's a consultant. He helped elect Tracy Kraft Tharp and Andy Kerr, who's two of your county commissioners. And Brittany Pedersen served with both of those people in the legislature. So, I mean, talk about a cozy relationship, as Natalie called it, really cozy. And then Leslie Dahlkamper's there as well. And they all turn around, return that favor, working together, helping get him elected and hire Ian Silveri's company for 340,000. Of course, 190,000 of that's going to Ian himself. So you can see how this works. You can see how the Democrats take care of their own and really funnel that tax money back to their own crew, and then use that to continue this little cycle. I mean, it's totally crazy, but it definitely needs to be exposed. So check out, there's a great video I put out with Natalie on freestatecolorado.com where we really spend about an hour going through all the connections. We look at who Ian's company is, what other things they've been involved with, who else is associated with it, and then going to these people as well, the county commissioners. So check that out for sure. So I did want to get into the ballot measures. So, even though liberty is dying at the legislature and the county is no better and the schools are no better, some of our best choices for freedom, I think, come through the ballot. Colorado's direct democracy, our process for getting initiatives and constitutional amendments on the ballot is extremely helpful. So here's some I wanted to highlight and definitely get you more information for anybody interested. One of the big ones is the Save Girls Sports. They're out there collecting signatures right now, basically making it so that sports have to be associated with your biological gender, biological sex, whatever you want to call it. So, not allowing boys to compete in girls sports. So that's a big one. There was a big rally, I believe, I want to say in Colorado Springs or somewhere yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe it was today, in support of that. And Riley Gaines was out here for that, the swimmer. Another one by the same people is this parental notification for gender confusion. This bill would require that schools, within 72 hours of finding out that the student is confused about their gender, they'd have to notify the parents. So no more hiding things from parents. That's out there getting signatures right now as well. That's another big one. So they're definitely looking for volunteers as always. Always a shortage of volunteers and money for this kind of stuff. So definitely get connected if you're interested, but that would be great to see on the ballot. Michael Fields of Advanced Colorado, and a guy you probably are familiar with, has some really good initiatives this year. The Initiative 50, you guys touched on briefly earlier, is the property tax cap that would cap property tax increases by 4%. Any increases over that 4% would have to go to the voters for approval. So, mostly good bill. I understand there is some controversy there on that bill in terms of how it works. I don't know all the details exactly, but I think it does potentially override some local control, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that. His other bill or other initiative he's putting forward is this parole eligibility ballot measure. So that one's still going through the stages. That property tax bill will be on the ballot in November. That is confirmed. It's already been approved and the signatures have been turned in. The other ones have not so far gotten the signatures from what I'm aware, but parole eligibility would require people convicted of violent crimes or serious property crimes to serve a minimum amount of their sentence. Because one of the issues we've seen with this increase in crime in Colorado is the parole board, Polis's parole board, and these soft on crime DAs getting these people out of jail a lot earlier than they probably should be. So this bill would force them to make these convicted criminals serve longer terms of their sentences. So that's an interesting initiative we might see in November. He does have a school choice initiative. I really haven't heard anything about it, but it'd basically be writing into the Constitution that Colorado parents and children have a right to school choice and the best educational options available. I think that's an extremely great winning issue that Republicans, conservatives, or liberty-minded candidates should really focus on, is that school choice issue. I think that's now more than ever is a big winning issue that should make some waves. Caldera of the Independence Institute also has some initiatives going through the process right now to get on the ballot. One is to reduce the income tax. We've seen that successful in years past. He's done it at least twice before. I'd love to see it be a little more aggressive, but hopefully that does go through. I think that's a really good measure that people love to keep their whole paycheck. So I can see that happening. Caldera also is trying to limit the legislative session. Currently, right now, it's at 120 days. This would reduce it to 90 days. That would be amazing. That would be great. It would definitely mitigate a lot of the damage, a lot of the problems that these legislators have. So would really love to see that go through. Then there's the quote unquote good initiative. So there's this Linda Good. If you're familiar with Linda Opines or Linda Good or some of these other people down there, probably some names you're familiar with. They have a website. I got it actually right here, if I'm not mistaken. It's coloradocounts.com, the good initiatives. So those three is basically to prohibit ranked choice voting in Colorado. You may have heard of ranked choice voting, or it's different than approval voting. I'm sure you guys have know a little bit more about approval voting, but this would prohibit ranked choice voting in Colorado. It would also basically say that you have to get ballot access through caucus and assembly, and also that primary elections from major political parties. I don't know all the details on that, but there's three initiatives they're pushing there, and those are in direct response to Kent Thierry's initiatives. If you're familiar with him, Kent Thierry is basically the one we have responsible for open primaries and a change of how they do redistricting in Colorado and from years past. So on in the red there, if you can see it there, he's pushing this ranked choice voting, eliminating the caucus and assemblies, and also eliminating vacancy committees. He's pushing those bills. I know Dave Williams, GOP chair, was saying it's basically because Kent Thierry wants to become governor, but he's not going to, but there's no political party who will take him. So he wants to be able to make it easier for himself to become governor by eliminating his caucus and assembly process. And the ranked choice voting would absolutely be devastating, I think, for Liberty candidates. You could end up with Democrats running against themselves with no Republican or no Liberty candidate involved at all if that passes. So very interesting to see the good initiatives come out, quote unquote. Caldera also has a bill complete or initiative directly in response to Bill 158. That was the open meetings law bill I talked about earlier that Polis signed back in March. This would repeal a lot of those changes, basically creating more transparency and more sunshine protections for the General Assembly and getting more public exposure to what they're doing. So good one there. The red ones are some of the bad ones here. So they want to, there's a push to ban trophy hunting. So that's like your mountain lion hunting and everything. They want to ban that if they can. I think they're still going through the signature process. The big one that I think it will be on the ballot. It's the big Democrat push this year. This is probably their biggest one, is this taxpayer funded abortions. Of course, they're not going to call it that. It's all about enshrining in the state constitution the right to an abortion. That's what they're calling it. That's what they're pushing. But if you actually read the initiative, their amendment, at the very, very bottom, it says repeal the part of the Colorado Constitution that prohibits taxpayer funds going towards abortion. So Colorado's Constitution currently prohibits taxpayer money from going towards paying for abortions. This whole idea behind this constitutional amendment is to repeal that provision. They want to use taxpayer money to pay for people's abortions. So hopefully that's going too far. Hopefully enough people will reject that, but we'll see. Of course, mentioned the Kent Theory ballot measures. And Wasserman, if you know Scott Wasserman of the Bell Policy Center, a really bad guy. He hates Tabor. He really wants to grow government, and he has an initiative he's pushing out in a direct response to Michael Fields' property tax initiative, which is this local approval for lowering property taxes. So Fields basically says, we're going to lower property taxes blanket across the state. Wasserman says you'd have to get local voters' approval to lower property taxes. He thinks they could sell it. People will say, well, hold on, we got to pay for the schools and the fire departments, etc. So he's trying to fight back and push back that way. So some really bad ballot measures, but actually a lot of really good ballot measures. We'll see how many of them end up on the November ballot. But nonetheless, very interesting to see, kind of hopeful, actually optimistic to see so many good stuff out there. So much good stuff. So uh, another thing I'm paying attention to, I know you're a nonpartisan group, not really able to really talk about candidates too much. However, nonetheless, I think there's 6 state house seats that are primarily the most opportunistic for Republicans to flip this coming election. And that's House District 50 up where I'm at in Greeley. The Democrat Mary Young only won by 330 votes 2 years ago. This is after redistricting, so the current district is the same, 330 votes. And she had there was a libertarian third-party candidate in the race. It's not the case this year. We made sure there was no libertarian running against Ryan Gonzalez in House District 50, the Republican. And with some support from some other third party groups, I think he can win that seat. I think if we're going to chip away at the Democrat supermajority in the House, House District 50 in Weld has to flip. Also, House District 43, that's Bob Marshall's district. He won by only 405 votes 2 years ago. That's Douglas County, Highlands Ranch area. So another prime seat to flip. Of course, that explains a lot of his more moderate positions this legislative session. House District 16. That's Stephanie Vigil. She is absolutely unhinged. She's one of the big people pushing this idea. She hates her parents. If you see her stuff online, she just totally does not like the idea of kids and parents having that relationship. She thinks the state should be involved because she had a bad issue with her parents. So now she wants to change that for everybody. She's totally crazy. She won by 710 votes in Colorado Springs. So hopefully she'll be defeated as well, and I think it's Kelsey, if I'm not mistaken, I believe is her opponent. And we have House District 25, which is Tammy Story. I'm sure many of you are familiar with, as you mentioned earlier. Uh, she only won by 719 votes 2 years ago, so really a huge opportunity there to flip that seat. For everybody down there in South Jeffco, if there's nothing else you do this year, this election, volunteering on that campaign to defeat Tammy Story, I think would be huge. Just focus on that, get her out. That could go a long way. Two other seats, Hamrick in House District 61. She won by 1,100 votes. That's in East Centennial, Piney Creek Ranches, and then House District 19 up in Longmont, Firestone, Frederick, Dacono, Erie. That's Oh gosh, I know Dan Woog is running. He served previously. He's running for that seat, and that one's a little bit harder at 1467. But those are the top six seats in terms of the lowest voter differential between Republicans and Democrats 2 years ago. So the most winnable seats, if you ask me. I know you'll see a lot of other people with a lot of other data out there based on voter registration, based on previous voting history, and the like. But this is after since redistricting. This is what it was 2 years ago. I think this is the best chances personally. So that's some of the focus I'm going to be having the rest of this year. Last thing, really, I say local activism is where you can make the biggest difference. I know a lot of people are very concerned about the presidential election this year. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on overseas, but really, if you're going to spend your time, your energy, your money, focus on local, 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 get involved in your city council, your county commissioner races, and of course, your state legislative races. I mean, when you see that Tammy Story only won by 700 votes, imagine how easy that could be to flip with enough volunteers and people involved. So find Free State Colorado on Telegram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and of course, freestatecolorado.com. I'm going to be doing a lot more interviews, videos. I'm going to interview all these candidates, everybody I've been trying to help to get the word out there, give them some exposure, give them some material they can use for their own campaign websites. So please, if you know anybody out, any other issues or anything going on, send them my way. I'm happy to try and promote them. I have a pretty good social media following, so I know I can get them some good exposure. So please use me as a resource. Email me. Mike has my email. Please give that out to anybody who's interested. Uh, One last thing, and this is a tweet I put out a couple 10 days ago. Uh, some of the ideas that for supporting liberty in Colorado in 2024, flipping 6 House seats. I think that's huge. Like I just said, 3 state Senate seats. I don't know which state Senate seats necessarily, except for Kevin Priola's seat up here, where I'm at in Greeley, because he's term limited, and of course he was a Republican before, so it's should be a more Republican seat. But of course, all the state senators who are running this year, though, this is their first time these districts have been there since redistricting. So the districts have changed. So you got to kind of look at that historical data and kind of wonder how it's going to play out this cycle. But I think at least 3 state Senate seats, 6 House seats, I think is very doable. Also, volunteering and supporting those pro-liberty ballot measures, I think, is huge. I do think bringing more people into the gun community, new people, take your neighbor, take your friend, family member, get them out to the range, teach them to be a responsible gun owner. That's what's going to help turn the tide is this pro-gun culture, pushing back against these politicians. I think we have momentum going our way. And I say support local food producers and farmers markets. It's a great way, especially, I think about COVID when they weren't letting people into grocery stores. When there's a lot of talk about vaccine passports, that stuff could come back. So having relationships with local ranchers, local farmers, I think that's a huge path forward. If you could have a food system outside of the state control, that's what really going forward. And then what you're doing tonight, building community with events, getting people together, having people in your home. I heard somebody say earlier, showing up at Liberty on the Rocks down in Denver at the Independence Institute. There's going to be a lot of campaign events, a lot of local Liberty events, but just build that community up, bring new people, and let's see where we can go. So thank you guys very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Happy to take any questions if you like, but check out, just keep up to date, and I'd love to be a resource for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good, Brandon. Go ahead.
That illegal immigration House Senate Bill 182 for the Colorado driver's license, did that pass or fail?
It passed. It passed. 182 did pass. The governor has not signed it yet. He doesn't have to sign it, but I imagine he will probably. But yes, it did pass.
They can vote.
No, they're not supposed to be able to vote, but it's certainly a pathway
Yeah.
getting them to vote.
Is there any way to determine how many full-time employees were added this legislative session? Because almost every bill I looked at had, 1, 2, 3, up to 9 full-time employees added.
Yes, there is a way to do it. The legislative staff, there's a really great staff who work down at the legislature and they can compile all of that data. Your best bet, if you ask me, is to find a pro-liberty legislator down there, like Scott Bottoms, Ken DeGraff, Stephanie Luck, any of those or others down there. Reach out to them. If you have a good relationship with any of them, they can definitely inquire and get any information from the staff a lot easier than you and I can. I'm sure there's a report somewhere compiling that, but if it was me, I would just reach out to one of those legislators, and if you have a good relationship with them, and see if they can find out for you. But that'd be a great number to see.
Good, John.
Brandon, Mike had mentioned something about the lack of freedom of speech and in the legislature this year. And I know you put out a really good video, and you might include a link to that I saw, a month ago, about the Speaker of the House shutting down discussion many times.
Definitely. Yeah. There's a couple of videos I could refer people to. If you go to freestatecolorado.com, scroll down. I did this video, Colorado's 5 worst state legislators. This is from back in March. They're silencing critics and coming for your kids. And there's this woman, Val, who's on Twitter, and she has a really good, and she was keeping track. She was making all these video clips, really getting the information out there. So we went through and basically put this whole video together. A pretty long video going through a lot of instances, playing clips of these legislators shutting down discussion, whether it was in committee hearings from just citizens or shutting up the other legislators and silencing them. So I'd say check that one out. Another great video. The video that had the most views out of anything I've ever done was from back in January, and that was with Scott Bottoms, state rep from Colorado Springs. I mean, he lets it all out. He says that Speaker McCluskey's unhinged. She's absolutely crazy. He talks about when she would pull him into her office and just scream at him and berate him. That video is very, very interesting to see his perspective as a serving legislator, talking about the Speaker of the House and what she's done. So check that out as well. I'm definitely going to have more. I'm really hoping to get some good feedback from some of the legislators and get them on some new interviews, some new videos now that the session's over. But check those out. But there's countless examples for sure about what they're doing down there. I know they just went after Ken DeGraff the last week of the session because they passed that library bill, making it changing the process of how books can be taken out of public libraries. And he was reading from one of the books. You see this a lot at school board meetings and in town meetings across the country. And he was reading one of the books. And I mean, it was like they shut him up pretty quick because it's so vulgar. And he's like, this is one of the books mentioned in the bill. This is one of the books mentioned that you're protecting. And it's totally vulgar. It's totally inappropriate. If it's too inappropriate for the legislature, how is it appropriate for our schools? So that was another good example. If you follow Ken DeGraff on Twitter, his Twitter videos this year have been pretty good. He's got tons of clips of his speeches on the House floor, lots of examples of that. So Ken DeGraff, definitely one of our Liberty leaders down there. So check out his stuff on Twitter as well. If you're not, I mean, I never used to be on Twitter, but I got to tell you, it's a great place to meet other people, and there's a huge community of pro-liberty Coloradans who are really paying attention on there. So, it's more valuable than Facebook is, if you ask me.
Yep. Hey, Brandon, what's your last name?
WARK.
Well, Brandon, that was a fabulous presentation. I really appreciate that, and stuffed a lot of stuff into a short period of time. Because when you have over 700 bills, and you got to kind of pick and choose which ones you need to talk about. I don't know how they get through that many bills.
Yeah, they don't do their due diligence.
Well, he's gonna send it to Mike and Mike.
Yeah,
Okay, so if you'll send a copy of this session here this evening and anything else, and I have to say, man, I've watched most of the videos on Brandon's site, Free State Colorado. They're incredible. I mean, he gets people on there that, like he says, they do not hold back, and you get some really good information. And you're gonna have Ian Escalante on there, you said, doing another wrap up?
Yep, Thursday night I'm gonna record it. Hopefully it goes out Friday or maybe next Monday, depending on the editing. But yeah, I'm gonna be talking about more in depth on the gun bills with him. If you followed Free State Colorado previously, I used to do every week last year. I did a weekly roundup going through some of the news articles. I put it on pause because we were doing our weekly legislative call, but this is going to come back. So every week I'm going to be doing a video, maybe a half hour to an hour, just going through highlighting some of the news articles of the week, maybe some stuff you missed, and really trying to bring some exposure, some awareness to some of these different issues. So I have a lot of fun doing it. So check out Free State Colorado on YouTube or the website. The website, I'll have the video and then all the links to every article I talk about. So that way you can go in and read the article yourself or dig a little deeper. Because I don't, I'll cover part of the article, but I can't spend all time on it. So check that out. Free State Colorado, the weekly roundups are coming back now that the legislative session is over. So really excited for that.
One more thing, Brandon. You mentioned Tammy's story, but you didn't mention George Muma, who is running against him. Or against her. And his website is helpgeorgewin.com, and he's doing really well.
Awesome. I really appreciate that. I'll reach out to him. I'd love to interview him this summer and just try and get him some exposure, try and help out his campaign in the way that I can do it. So really appreciate you bringing that up.
And how do I give him your info?
Feel free to give him, there's a contact if you go to freestatecolorado.com and you can hit on here contact. It's not the easiest to see, but it's a contact. I think it's Free State Call. Let me double check. I think it's freestatecolorado.com/contact, and my email's on there. Mike can also give you my email. I'm okay with that. Or send me a message on Twitter, or Facebook, and I'll definitely reach out. But yeah, I'll reach out to him as well. I definitely want to help out how I can.
Oh, yeah, because he's doing really, really well, going up to Morrison, Conifer, and all that kind of good stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brandon. Another guy that, and I'll talk to Charlie Johnson running for County Commission District 1.
Yeah.
He just might have a shot against Rachel Zenzinger. He is fully committed to taking this on and trying to unseat. Well, Rachel will be a new person running because Tracy is stepping down, not rerunning. So
Perfect.
I'll get your information to him, and maybe the two of you can connect.
Please.
And do an interview with him. That would be fantastic.
Awesome. Well, hey, I really appreciate it, everybody. If you can make it down to the Independence Institute tomorrow, it's a free event. Oh, I'm going to do my legislative recap. It's my 4th year doing it. We covered a lot of it tonight, but I'll go into a little bit more detail and talk about some other bills we didn't get to. So, but Mike, really appreciate the opportunity. And yeah, let's see what we can do this year, guys and girls.
Okay, Brandon.
thanks.
Thank you for fighting the good fight, buddy.
All right. Appreciate you guys. Take care.
All right. Take care now.
Don't forget to give us his email.
Yes.